All right, in this video, we'll be looking at 8.4, the effect of density of populations, Unit 8, ecology, and AP biology. So what is population density? Population density refers to how closely individuals in that population live to one another. If there's a wide area with very few people, that's going to be a very sparse population. If there's a small area with lots of people, that's going to be a very dense population. This is a picture of the population density of the countries of the world. You can see the most densely populated areas in the world and the most sparsely populated areas in the world. A place like Canada that has very few people over a giant area is very sparsely populated. Whereas a place like, well, this is like South Korea, Burma here is another one. Some of these smaller countries over here, lots of people in a small area, so very densely populated areas. Get the idea. This is just another picture to show this sort of thing. This is black bear density in Wisconsin. Um, Notice, where would you expect the most people to live in Wisconsin? They would live in the southern part of the state where climates are more hospitable. This is actually a city. This is like Milwaukee here, so you would expect black bears not to be in Milwaukee. But as you get to the northern reaches of the state where there are less people, you'd expect for there to be more bears. And so population density has to do with environmental factors, like we've been talking about even in Unit 7, where there's less stress, there's going to be more population. Where food is available, there's going to be more population, more densely packed population. Where food is limited, you're going to have less population. Makes a lot of sense. All right, and so there are two kinds of factors that we will talk about that are dependent or independent upon population density. Density dependent factors tend to be biotic factors, but not always. These are factors that are directly dependent upon the density of a population and affect a population more or less because of their density. And so, a great example of this would be like competition for resources. In a very densely populated area, there's going to be a lot more competition. Disease in a very densely populated place, disease is going to have a lot greater effect than in a sparsely populated place. Predation, as we see in this picture here. Crocodiles will eat a lot more fish if there's a greater density of fish, and fish will have a lot less fish if there's more crocodiles in the area. You get the idea. And so, density dependent factors tend to be biotic factors. Territoriality is another one I didn't mention. You get the idea. Density independent factors affect all populations equally, meaning that it doesn't matter if a population is densely populated or sparsely populated, that population is going to be affected equally. So here's a picture of drought. Drought is a natural disaster. It doesn't matter if there's 5 people in the population or 500, it is going to affect those populations equally. These are typically abiotic factors in nature, but not always. Natural disasters are high on the density independent factor list. Pollution is another one, which wouldn't really be a natural disaster. It's more of a human caused sort of thing, but it affects all populations equally. So when we talk about populations growing, according to these limiting factors like these density dependent or density independent factors, we aren't typically dealing with exponential growth, which is what we talked about in the last lecture, where a population is growing without any limitations. When populations grow with these limitations in mind, this is typically called logistic growth. It shows that the population will start to grow quickly and then initially or eventually kind of cap off here or kind of recede or slowly gradually kind of decline until they kind of reach a straight line where there's no um, increase or no decrease at all. Sometimes you'll see this called the S-shaped curve, this logistical growth model. Um, And this maximum amount, that where it reaches that peak, is typically referred to as the carrying capacity. And so the carrying capacity is where the population will hover around until some of those factors are eliminated. If you look at a graph of human populations, for instance, human populations were fairly steady for thousands of years until the advent of agriculture. And then when agriculture happened, well, populations grew because people didn't have to follow the herds around so much. And then in the industrial age, when the availability of food was more common, the availability of medical care and that sort of thing became more common, and people were able to focus on things like raising a family as opposed to eating and staying healthy. um, then populations boomed, and we saw the human population begin to grow exponentially as we eliminated our um, limitations. And so most populations are going to grow according to this carrying capacity. And you guessed it, logistical growth formulas can also be represented mathematically. And so you see our same sort of thing here, change of population over change in time. You see our R max, right? Because this had to do with the maximum amount, the exponential growth. But here, the carrying capacity is going to be figured into that. And so the carrying capacity is usually going to be a known variable. Haven't ever seen a problem where an individual is asked to solve for the carrying capacity. Rather, is typically going to be solving for the rate of growth based upon the carrying capacity. So again, these types of problems are typically going to represent themselves as more of a plug and play sort of scenario, as opposed to you having to derive something from the text. The only thing you're going to have to derive might be the rate or the change, but normally you're going to be solving for this as opposed to solving for these other things. And so not too hard, and you're usually going to have a graph or something like that in order to help you with those problems.